Well, hello, friends. David Vos here. Hope you're having a wonderful, beautiful day. And it's a beautiful day in Oklahoma. Well, I've got some information for you today. I think it's going to be pretty enlightening. Stay tuned. You're going to learn some things today that you never knew before. Now, some of you may have heard a couple of these things, but I don't think anywhere on the internet you're going to see this talked about very much. And if you do, it's going to be disjointed and you won't understand what's going on. It's information that you need to know because you need to put this together to find out what's going on, why we're impeaching this president. We're going to tie some things in together that are just amazing and very important. We're going to be talking about the John Jacob Astors that we were talking about the other day. We're going to be talking about Donald Trump. We're going to be talking about Nikola Tesla. We're going to be talking about Edison and CERN and the battle, the war that's going on right now. Because there is a war going on for this world. And it's a real war. And if you don't think it's real, or if you don't think that this is, it's like a lot of people think that the world is run by these elite that are very powerful and they've got control of everything. And you'd be right. However, there isn't just one side. If there was, you really wouldn't have things like the Titanic sinking with the richest man in the world on board, or it probably the second richest man in the world, John Jacob Astor's the fourth. Now, remember that word, that number, the fourth. John Jacob Astor's the fourth went down with the Titanic. The reason he went down is because he was a very wealthy person. He came over to America. You'll probably, guess that he is a member of the elite family that runs the world. And there was a few people that went down on that fateful day in 1912. All of them very powerful members of this elite family that ruled the world. Quite a few that were very important. One of them, his name was Strauss. You probably have heard of Levi Strauss. You're probably wearing them right now. We call them Levi's. Well, the reason why we call them Levi Strauss, or it's a company, but that we call them Levi's, we're wearing Levi's, because that is the word Levi in the Bible. They never got an inheritance in the land of Israel because they were the priests. Sometimes they're called Kohans in the Hebrew. You'll probably remember that Donald Trump's lawyer that ended up going to jail, his name was Cohen. He was a lawyer. You'll find some of the most powerful lawyers in the world are named Cohen or Levi or Schiff, related to the Soroses. And you'll find some that are Italians, such as some mafia bosses, John Gotti, Giuliani. Now you've got two very powerful families. Giuliani is such a powerful lawyer that as soon as Cohen was put in jail, Trump procured his services. Now that he's being impeached, Trump has procured Horowitz's services. So these are two very powerful. If you're going to do anything in this world, you're going to have some of the most powerful people on your side, because they're the ones who can pull the levers. So it seems that Donald Trump is very knowledgeable and has been for years working with many of these powerful lawyers. One of them he used for years, whose name was Con, which I think is very interesting. I don't know if maybe we got the word con artist from this man, but he was one of the most powerful lawyers that was able to help Trump so that he, and now a lot of you are probably thinking, wait a minute, Dave, you're saying that Donald Trump's corrupt and using corrupt, evil lawyers and this stuff. Well, let's face it, he was a billionaire. And if you're going to be a billionaire, you're going to have to know some people. And you're going to have to protect yourself. I mean, you can't go down in a pit of vipers and not be wearing some boots, So, for any of you who think that Donald Trump is just some kind of angel that fluttered down from heaven, well, just because his grandfather's name had Christ in the middle, yeah, that was his name, Frederick Christ Trump, which is interesting. But if you think that there is any human being on this earth that is an angel or a saint, now I'm not saying there aren't saints, but those individuals are probably working tirelessly in Tibet or somewhere in the mountains of the Ural Mountains or the steppes of Mongolia, or somewhere in the high Rockies in Canada, or somewhere building, working on a little cabin, tirelessly writing a manuscript of love or something, practicing spiritual prayer and kindness toward all creatures. But in the real world here, we've got some very powerful people. We've got two sides. And many of the, and don't think that just because you're Italian, you're a bad person, right? That's ridiculous. The Pope is, ruling over Vatican City. That's the most powerful man in the world. And under him is a organization, an order of sort of a priesthood called the Jesuits. They are the most powerful order of priests in the world. They wear the black robes, and to this day, everything we do, whether it's the court system or the laws or the lawyers or the teachers, the dossiers, the scientists or whatever, they get all their degrees. You can't be a scientist without a degree. Now, you can call yourself whatever you want to, and perhaps you know more than the scientists. I wouldn't doubt that. But unless you have one of their degrees, and you only get those from a Jesuit-run university, accredited Jesuit university, they run all the higher learning. So there isn't any way to become very powerful in the world without becoming a lawyer or a dossier or a PhD or whatever, getting your degree. You got to move up the ranks. Now, somebody could be, there are cases where people don't have any learning, and they perhaps never even went through high school. Excuse me. And yet they seem to, maybe they did some investing and they got kind of powerful and so forth. Well, once in a while somebody will do that and they'll become a millionaire or something. Well, what'll happen if that person doesn't protect themselves with a lawyer or get into a lot of those individuals, we think they're just like, some little innocent, naive peasant, with $1 million. It's probably not going to happen, because what you'll find is they're either, if they allow them to keep that money or that power, it's because they are in some kind of group like a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon or something like that. Now, so therefore you don't necessarily have to be a Jesuit or in the Catholic order of Jesuit priests or a Cohen or anything like that to have power. But you're never going to have complete power. I mean, they always have their little patron puppets and stuff that they'll put into power. They give them a couple million and then a pat them on the back, but they got to do what they're told. If they're not working for the man, they end up coming And I know people that had a little bit of money. They wanted to go on vacation, went down to Mexico, went to Guadalajara or something like that. Got them a little nice Riviera for the weekend. And invariably somebody will come up to them and say, hey, I've got a deal for you. You know, I want you to invest in this, and I'm gonna, I'm a great lawyer, and I'll, first of all, they'll get them lured in by having somebody anonymous come along and try to sue them or something. So then somebody else will just anonymously come along and say, hey, I'm the best lawyer in all the world. I'll protect you. Just sign right here in the bottom line, and I'll take this to court, and we'll give me a little bit of money, and we'll fix this. Don't worry about it. Then you'll wake up in the morning and find out that your entire state is gone. Your bank account's been, completely taken over by this guy because you just signed over your signature. They know the law. They will get your money. You can't just get under the radar. It's impossible. Now, if you did have maybe $1 million and you went off somewhere and mind your own business and they never heard a peep out of you, maybe they wouldn't know or wouldn't care or whatever, put your money under the mattress or something, you might get away with it. I'm not saying it's impossible. But for the most part, anyone with money, that's power. And anybody with power has to be working in one organization or another. You've got to be a Mormon, like Mitt Romney, who's a billionaire, or that's an accredited group. They can control you. You still kind of have to work for them. You couldn't say, well, I'm a Mormon, therefore I get to have billions of dollars. Well, how do you just voila have billions of dollars? You have to get financing and stuff like that. So we have to establish the fact that everybody in the world who has a lot of money and power has been in the world for a long time. They're not some innocent little dove. Speaking of doves, you might have seen that there was a picture, I don't remember what magazine it was, in the 1980s or 90s, of Donald Trump holding a dove. Now, for most people, there was no explanation. Nobody knew why Donald Trump was seen in this big famous magazine holding this dove in a particular way, specific way. But you wouldn't know that. You would just think, oh, he's holding a dove. Okay, that's nice. Well, the way he was holding the dove was an exact replica of a picture that you can hardly find anymore anywhere on the internet because they've gotten rid of it. But you will find that this is true. You can look it up. Nikola Tesla loved doves, and there was a specific dove that he made a very odd statement once. He says, I used to love that dove. I loved that dove like a man loved a woman, or something to that effect. And there were pictures of Nikola Tesla holding that dove. But in this one picture, he was holding the dove with both hands, one hand cupped inside of the other, in an exact, specific way, almost a sign, because it was a specific hand was placed in a specific way over the other hand, and the dove was sitting in a specific spot. That exact same pose was done by Trump, and it's important to understand why. For those who know behind the scenes, and usually it's only the very high elite, the families of individuals from the Astor family, the Rothschilds, and so forth, they know the uppity ups, the billionaires, the Levi Strauss, and the Rockefellers, and these individuals, they were aware of the fight and the problems going on behind the scenes. All of us peasants, we're not aware of it, so we just see that picture and we don't realize what it means. But it represents this specific peace, this power of the dove, the power of peace that was in the hand of Tesla, which was, remember, Nikola Tesla was inventing very amazing things. I mean, he didn't just invent stuff like motors and generators, but we're talking about generators that were thousands and hundreds of thousands of volts that could be used to reverse gravity. And he was also working on a machine that he called free energy, which we're going to prove in this video was basically the forerunner to what we call the internet. And so basically what we're going to find in this video is that there is this big power grab going on in the world. Yeah, we've got some visitors here. That's okay, because this video is too important to stop filming now. So we'll just carry on. They'll get some water, I guess, out of the river, and I don't know what they're doing, but they'll leave in a minute. Well, so there's this, the whole point of our history, especially in the last 100 years, and this actually goes back to the days of Babylon and the Sumerian, the Nephilim who fell from heaven and all of this, but we're not going to probably get into it that deeply today. But carrying it down to this last 100 years, 200 years, the struggle that we're in, we've got to know who the players are and what they're up to. There is one side that is trying to destroy us, and there is another side, a very powerful family. It doesn't mean they've always been perfect. They have tried to be as decent as they can. But when you're fighting with fire, you got to play with fire. You know, you fight fire with fire, as they say. So don't be surprised if the supposed good side of this whole thing. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit distracted. We'll get back on track here in a second. But don't be surprised if you know, a lot of people say, oh, well, Trump is a billionaire, he can't be a good person. We're all good people. We've established that. But there are individuals who have been taken over by the dark side, and in this particular carnation, they're completely deceived and blinded by their own lust and greed. That doesn't mean that all of us, no matter how good we are, aren't, at times, we don't make mistakes. The point, what we really got to, for any of us to be a good person in this life, is we have to go and finally make the decision that nothing else matters except love and goodness and helping one another. When you finally get to the point where you're mature enough, you know, most of the world, I'd say 90% of the people on this earth, they haven't reached that level. So they're still working from instinctual nature and, you know, maybe lying to their spouse or you know, stealing some little thing at work or trying to get ahead improperly or not showing kindness at the store to the person behind the desk and just being angry and mean and all of this kinds of thing. Now you take somebody who's got all these little problems and put them in a position of power. They're little children in positions of power. They can be very, very bad. Remember, the individuals that murdered the Lord Jesus Christ, they were pretty bad. They were very blind. Jesus called them blind guides who led the blind right into the pit. And yet Jesus said, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. So, what is a good person? Somebody who's always been perfect? Somebody you can see their wings on their back of their, you know, no. There isn't anybody like that. None of us have wings down here. But some of us, like the apostles, made mistakes. The apostle Paul was consenting to the murder of Christians. He says, I'm not even worthy to be called a Christian or an apostle, but I am what I am by the grace of God. And he said he was actually chosen for that very reason, to show that God's grace is absolute and complete. That everybody will attain unto salvation, no matter what you've done or who you are. The problem is we've got to overcome this darkness. And so because we've been going through this for thousands of years, there are certain individuals that have learned. Remember Simon the Magus that went to Peter and said, oh, wow, I see you have this power where whomever you lay hands on receives healing, and you've got this ability to give the Holy Spirit to anybody you want. Give me this power. And he says, I'll give you money. And the Apostle Peter says, you have no business in this because your heart is full of vile. See, so, and that didn't mean well, anyway. So the thing of it is, there's always been the two sides. And you can imagine that Simon Magus, being a magician, probably went through the school, may have been initiated, but because his heart wasn't in the right place, he was looking for power, not to use it for good, but for bad. And Peter could see that. Peter had all this power, but he didn't. Look at Jesus. He said, I don't want your crown. I don't want to sit on your throne. Yeah, I'm a king, but this isn't my kingdom. And the apostles, they were martyred. They gave up that. I mean, think about the power that they had achieved, and they could heal anybody they wanted, or can you imagine how much money they could have made off of that if they had wanted to? But they knew that none of this entire world was worth it. If they gained the whole world and lost their soul, it wouldn't be worth it. They had attained some kind of enlightenment to where they understood that, and they were on the right path. Okay, so there are individuals, just like Paul, who did things wrong in his life, but eventually came around. And that's the same as today. We've got individuals that are working to help mankind. Doesn't mean they're perfect. In some cases, they've done things that we might dig up, that something, along the road that Trump did. Oh, he, had a bad business deal and it wasn't good. And he had some poison in the water that he didn't fix, and the roof was leaking, and his tenants were unhappy. Or, I'm sure you could pull up all kinds of things. Maybe he said something vulgar. Maybe he was lost his temper or something. But for the most part, we found out that he's been good. His Ivanka Trump, his first wife, he was good to her. She says he's a decent person. They've investigated Trump for years, and they haven't never really found anything huge that they can say, oh, this man has done something terribly illegal. He's murdered people. He's done terrible things. No. On the contrary, as we've said in many of the videos we've been talking about, he's been involved with very powerful political figures for a long, long time. They've been biding their time. There's a battle going on. So you want to figure out what's going on and how these two sides are fighting, and what they're fighting over, and what they're trying to do. Because we need to be awake and to find out what this impeachment is about. What JFK was murdered for. Why Nixon was impeached. Why is there a thing called CERN over there in, Switzerland? What are they doing over there? Who invented this information? So Tesla, he was sitting there with this dove, which represents peace. He had this information that could have, remember, just before the World War II was over, Tesla mysteriously dies. He's living in a pyramid in the middle of New York City in the Wyndham building, the New Yorker building. And the whole building's turned into a motor or a generator. And he's working on inventing this thing. He's got this invention that looks like some kind of a tower with a little round thing on the top. And we're going to find out what that is. We've talked about how John Trump, which is Donald Trump's uncle, ended up receiving the information that Tesla had. He was able to go through his papers. John Trump was head of the MIT in the government, and they were working on radiology and energy, and this was what led to remember we talked about how the CIA has been putting satellites in the air. There's a group of individuals that have taken over this knowledge for warfare. They use the warfare to conquer their enemies and to have control over us, to use us to build this prison that we're living in. Because they've gotten a hold of this information that Tesla was working on, which is the internet. And that's what CERN is. That's where the internet was born, is CERN in Europe. And that technology was taken from John Trump and a man named Van de Graaff, who invented a generator, and John Trump, who later improved it. And they had a joint venture with this company called the Van de Graaff Generator Company. And that is the technology, the particle accelerator technology that is being used at CERN. And there is speculation that it is something to do with time travel. But in fact, that is where the internet was born. And I believe that the most important thing that they're doing there, the bad side, shall we say, the ones who have taken over this through war, by using this knowledge for warfare and to control us, they've gotten control of it. This one side of the elite are controlling us, and it's not for good. It was a mad dash during World War II to get a hold of this information. And Tesla would not give them his inventions while he was alive. And he said it was because he would not allow it to be used for warfare and for evil purposes. He wanted to give us free electricity, he called it. That's what he called it. And that very tower that he was working on, that you've seen pictures of, was the same tower that John Trump later built. It was a tower with a round thing on top, and it was it was called the Van de Graaff generator, and it would generate thousands of volts. Now, when you can generate that many volts, you can do many things with it. It's the power. It's the knowledge to use the energy that is free in the earth. There are literally thousands of volts coming out of the earth, but it's at such a low amperage that that you need to have a specific knowledge to use it. So you wouldn't need Mr. Westinghouse or Thomas Edison, who were being financed by DuPont and the Rothschilds, to put a system or a grid around the earth that we would become enslaved. So now you have to pay for your electricity, and you've got these telephone lines. The reason why they have these electric lines running all over the earth is that way they can control the energy. It's not free. You have to pay for it. And then that was just one of the steps. The oil. Tesla had invented ways to run he had a battery. John Trump invented a battery that would last years, not just 5 years like the ones we have now, and would have much more charge, and you could run cars and never have to put gas or anything in them. And they wanted that information. So when Trump is seen holding that dove, for those who have eyes to see or who have a little knowledge to know what the symbols are, the way he was holding it in the exact manner that Tesla was holding it, we know that he was saying, look, the power for love, the dove of peace, is in my hands. And he was the front man to the good side of the elite who were trying to take down the bad side. Because you see, they have a very small window here. The bad side took over first, and this is why we've had all these wars. They took over the CIA and the FBI and NASA. They were all filled with these scientists that came from Germany. They sent John Trump over to Germany to compare what we had been working on after the war with what they were working on. He was privy to Tesla's information. And supposedly that information disappeared. And then John Trump, who, after he looked at it, he said, yeah, it's not no big deal. Some say that's what he told them. We don't know exactly what went on. But then he went to work with Van de Graaff and built this generator, which is the very thing that Tesla was working on. And it's the very technology that they're working on over there in CERN that is what created the internet. So you can't but draw conclusions that somehow or another, what their world is fighting over is to free us or control us. One side wants to stop these individuals from controlling us, and the other side is trying to defeat the good guys so they can completely control us. So it's not a done deal. You know, Google and Yahoo and eBay and Walmart and stuff like that. They have a lot of control, but they don't have the final, block. They're still a way out. And so the good side had to be very careful and play their cards just right. And so, as we said, in 1912, remember, Thomas Edison starts making electricity, and they converted all of New York, and Chicago had electricity, and there was two groups fighting. There was Westinghouse, and there was the Edison group. The Edison group was a very powerful inventor, but he was being financed by the bad guys, by DuPont, who was in sort of a group. He was in cohorts with the Rothschilds. And the other side was trying to give us free electricity. Well, they had control of most of the financial abilities, the bad side. And so they squashed Tesla's work, and because they couldn't make any money on it. And so the side that had this ability to make this free energy had to kind of like go underground and wait for their time when they could get control of the government and do something. So they knew way before World War I and World War II, they knew that these two sides were fighting who could gain control. So one of the things they had to do, they knew that the United States was going to be the powerhouse with all the technology coming out of here, and the brilliance and all the knowledge that Tesla had over here. He was living here in New York City. And so they knew that they had to control the American people. They had to because as long as there was an America with a constitution of freedom and justice and liberty for all, they could never gain control of the world. So they had to work their way into our government. And that's just done with corruption and mafia-style tactics. So Hillary Clinton's dad was running the mafia in Chicago. Well, they could still vote in a good mayor, and the good mayor would get some good police, and they'd make a little war and try to arrest a few people and take them to court. And then the bad guy would get into the positions of attorneys and lawyers, and they would do, clever things and lobby Congress or legislation or whatever and defeat them, and they defeat them. It was just long battle, and we're like, what are we going to do? How are we going to defeat these guys? They just never go away. And you had John Gotti running the New York thing, and the Bloombergs and the Rudy Giulianos. We'd have one guy was good come in and clean it up a little bit. None of them were perfectly good. None of them were perfectly bad, because the perfectly good ones couldn't just be perfectly good. Because then how are you going to get rid of the bad guys? You got to fight fire with fire. So it's really difficult to figure out who's what and what's what. But they're all very powerful people. And let me tell you, at this point, the sides that has been drawn with Trump and his Republican Party, not the Trump of McCain and Bush, but the Republicans of Trump's party are definitely against. There are a bunch of people that coalesced around Donald Trump when he became president, knowing that this was the chance that they'd been waiting for. This is what they had been planning, and they people like the Speaker of House, Newt Gingrich. He'd always been a good guy, but he couldn't really do anything. He was fighting against the Clintons, and the Clintons were involved with the Epsteins and the Weinsteins and the financiers, and it was just a big battle. It was just a give or take until they could figure out a way to completely win. In other words, take back the country, get rid of the corruption, and put these guys in jail. Because at that time, for a long time, they had control of the CIA and the FBI. They couldn't do anything about it. They were siphoning off money like a mafia scheme from our government, convincing people through this idea that, oh, hey, everybody vote for us and we'll give you welfare. Meanwhile, they're tightening the grip, and we got poisons everywhere, and more satellites in the sky and more control. But see, we wanted the control because they would entertain us. They were like the Joker that would come out and before the jester that would come out before the queen and entertain the king until he fell asleep, and poisoned his pie. and they could kill the king. It was just a plot. So one of the things they wanted to do was to control America. Well, somebody else had already gotten over here and had control of America, and his name was John Jacob Astor. Now, he was part of the elite family, but he was a good guy. At least he didn't have plans to destroy the world. He just wanted to have a big company. He had this empire, the Empire State, and he'd come over here first and become the wealthiest man in America, and some say probably the second wealthiest man in the world. And so he built his Empire State Building somewhere like 1893, or I don't remember the exact date. And he was, up atop his hill and sitting on his throne, and he was the power of this part of the world. The Rothschilds were over there, and they were like, oh boy, we need to gain control over that country over there with the Constitution, freedom, and liberty. We got to control it, and we got to bring it down. But we got this guy over there that's running the show. He's not working with us. He's not playing with, nicely with us, and he won't let us come in there and take his part of the world. He's got his side of the world and his control, and we got our side, and we disagree. So he had a lot of power and a lot of money. They couldn't do anything. The only way they could do is assassinate him. That's what they usually do when they got nothing else to do. When they can't convince somebody to join in one big evil scheme, John Jacob Astor says, no, thank you. I'm doing fine over here by myself. I think I'll probably take the world. I'll be able to, I like America. I like freedom. I don't want you to come over here and control our country. No. So what they did was they set this deal up with the Titanic. Remember, the Titanic that sunk wasn't even the Titanic. There was another ship, and I don't even remember the name of it. I think it was called Enterprise, or I don't remember. It's kind of funny. It's kind of like something like the Enterprise or something like that. It was a big ship, just about the same size as the Titanic, maybe slightly smaller. And it had been damaged. It had a big hole in it. And the insurance company said that it was you couldn't fix it. So they thought of a plan. They would have this supposed big trip on the Titanic, and it was broadcasted all over, it was advertised, and they would get all these most powerful people. Levi Strauss, and it wasn't Levi Strauss, it was one of his relatives, Strauss and Giegelman or something, and several of these individuals that were very powerful, including John Jacob Astor's number 4. And then they would sink this boat that wasn't even the Titanic. So they didn't have to lose the Titanic and just change the name. And they wouldn't lose any money because, it's a lot of money to build the Titanic. And they'd already gotten the insurance money on the other one. So if they lost it, they lost the boat that had already been scrapped. Well, so they didn't know that they were, somehow or another, I don't know exactly how they did this, whether it was I suppose it was the wrong boat that sunk, and it didn't hit an iceberg, but it had this hole, and it took this along a certain, maybe I think they repaired the hole just long enough to get it to a certain spot, and then they, maybe detonated some dynamite or something, and then it sunk. Well, the story goes that John Jacob Astor, he was an older guy at this time. He'd already been doing a lot of stuff, and he had the Empire State Building. He had a lot of money, and he was like, I don't know, probably 50-something years old or something. Well, he got married to a woman whose name was Madeline, and she was only like 18 years old, and there was some eyebrows raised on that. Remember, Trump's done the same thing. He's an older guy, and he's married to a young model. This is something that they do. He wasn't running around like some of these others doing pedophilia or whatever. But, since he was a very powerful man, he felt he had, something to offer. A young woman found him desirable, and he was married. It wasn't anything illegal. But there was eyebrows being raised and people that thought it was wrong. So anyway, they went on this honeymoon, and she was supposedly pregnant with his son. And when they felt they hit the iceberg or whatever happened and started to go down, they all went to the top of the deck. And the story goes that there was a woman named Leah, or Leah Akes or something, or Asks, is A-K-S, Ax. She had a child that they call Philip. They called him Philly. Well, here's the story that they tell you. They say that she had this child. She goes up to the deck and looking around, and everybody's getting into these lifeboats, and they're saying, all right, all the women get into these lifeboats over here. And so this guy comes running over there and grabs little Philly out of her arms and just chucks him overboard, throws him overboard, and he lands in the bottom in one of these boats. Now remember, this is a couple of stories. I mean, this is a huge, huge boat. The odds that this being a story is true is completely ridiculous. First of all, if you threw an infant or a baby that's a year or two old over a boat and dropped it that far, the baby would definitely be injured. If he might not have, even lived through it. But this is the story, and nobody would do such a thing. Even in a moment where people are running around and not knowing what to do, nobody's going to grab a baby and just chuck it out of a mother's arms. There's also some other strange stories, information around this baby. One of the stories says that before they chucked the baby over, this John Jacob Astor's wife, Madeline, who is 18 years old, she holds the baby and it wrapped it in her shawl. Maybe this is the way they got around, somehow this baby had the most powerful man in the world. Let's say that John Jacob Astor had a child and somehow or another this child was going to get off the boat. Remember, he's the most powerful man in the world. The boat's going to go down. John Jacob Astor's going to die. But his 18-year-old wife survives. Well, if she were to take this child, maybe the bad side, the Rothschilds would kill the child. So they had to be incognito. So they couldn't say, oh, the child survived, right? He probably knew when the boat was going down what was going on. He was probably very aware of the fact that he was being assassinated. Or, we don't know. But there's something going on here. Because somehow or another, this Astor has this baby, and the story goes it wasn't even her baby, but it had her shawl. And somehow they throw this baby overboard, and it just lands in some of this, as a woman, she was an Italian woman, supposedly. And so she's holding the baby, and they get rescued. And this is a few hours later, and this Leah Ax, who's looking for her baby, she hears her baby, and she recognizes the cry. Another thing that doesn't seem very reasonable. I understand that maybe a mother can hear her baby's cry and recognize it, but it seems a little far-fetched that she heard the baby cry and realized it was her baby. Perhaps that's a true story, and it's just told a little bit differently. I mean, you would, if you were looking for your baby and you hear a cry, you might go look. So she runs over there, and sure enough, that's her baby. Well, strange thing, but the Italian woman says, no, it's not your baby, it's my baby. So the captain of this ship, I can't remember the name of that ship, it's Calamanther. Anyway, it's a ship that came and rescued him. The Calamanther something like that. They say he has to do the Solomon thing. Remember where Solomon had to choose who was the real mother of the baby? Like, oh, well, cut her in half. And the real mother goes, oh, don't cut her in half, don't cut her in half. He had to be this wise Solomon to figure out which mother was really the mother of this child. Well, it turns out that the real mother, Leah Ax, supposedly, was, of course, Jewish, and so her baby was circumcised. And she said, well, that woman's Italian. They're Catholic. They don't circumcise their baby. So that's my baby. You can look, that baby's circumcised. Another story says there was a birthmark, a special birthmark that she knew was on her chest, was on the baby's chest. So she said, oh yeah, just look. Anyway, it was determined that the baby was Leah Ax. And they gave the baby back to her. And this little baby gets off the boat and grows up and lives this life and dies a normal a normal death, down the road years later. And supposedly it's just some guy named Philip, and he's just a normal person, no big deal, nothing to see here. However, go back. Why is Jacob Astor, there's thousands of people on this boat. Why is it him and his wife are interjected into this story? Somehow she's there. Oh, she happened to hold the baby, or she gave the lady her scarf or whatever. Somehow she's injected into the story. And this Madeleine Astor is also pregnant and ends up, I guess, 4 months later having a child. And if you look that up on the internet, you'll find that the child became known as John Jacob Astor the Sixth. Now, remember what I told you before. John Jacob Astor the Fourth was his father. And I said, remember that. The reason we remembered that is because if a man has a child and his name is John Jacob Astor the Fourth, why would you name your child John Jacob Astor the Sixth? What happened to the fifth? Well, if you go in on the internet and on Google, whatever, and try to look up a John Jacob Astor the Fifth, you'll find that it comes up the same person as John Jacob Astor the Sixth. They're the same person. They both are born 4 months after. They both have the same father and mother, Madeleine Astor, John Jacob Astor the Fourth. Both are born in the same place. Both die in the same place. And yet one of them but they just say it's the same person. And there's never any explanation given. And it seems that people have been looking this up for a long time and just never noticed that there's two John Jacob Astors. One's the fifth and one's the sixth. And nobody seems to know why. Well, I think the reason is because this child would be the heir to all this money. And I think that's the person that then would be going back and receiving his inheritance secretly, not openly, because if he was open about it, if he went around telling everybody, hey, I made it off the boat, my daddy's John Jacob Astor the Fourth and I'm the fifth, or whatever, then they'd seek him out and they'd kill him. Just like John F. Kennedy, his son, JFK Jr., supposedly mysteriously dies in the ocean on a plane. Never seen of again. Did he really die, or did he stage his death? Because, remember, he was going to run for Senate. The same Senate seat that Hillary Clinton was going to run for. And he would have gotten it. So either another person came up, mysteriously disappeared around Hillary Clinton in that mysterious way, or perhaps JFK Jr. had a plan. Because remember, JFK Jr. was good friends with Donald Trump. And not just good friends, but really close business partners. And they hung out all the time and planned how they would, run Donald Trump for president. Maybe at first they were thinking about running JFK Jr. as president. But they realized that they couldn't do that because he would just be murdered like his brother and, his girlfriend and his other girlfriend. I mean, everybody that was involved with JFK, Sr. and JFK Jr. and his brother Robert Kennedy and the movie star, Marilyn Monroe, which is his girlfriend, they all came up mysteriously disappearing. So JFK Jr. knew that if he ran for the Senate, he'd end up disappearing. So you can only imagine what must have happened. It seems as though there was a group of individuals that were planning all the way back from John Jacob Astor how to defeat these individuals, the Rothschilds and the DuPonts. And they had to come up with a long-term plan. And every time they would try to do so, they got JFK Jr. in there, or JFK in there, and then they ended up disappearing him. And it was this battle. It got to the point then. Now remember, John Jacob Astor's empire over here that the elite, the Rothschilds, wanted to take over, it was the sign of their empire was the Empire State Building. It was originally called the Waldorf Astoria Building because his name was Astor. He also went to Washington for a while, and that's why you've got Astoria, Washington. Waldorf is a place in Germany where he came from, where their family came from, his grandfather. So the Waldorf Astoria Building was named that because it was built by John Jacob Astor. It was originally built as not as the Empire State Building, but as their mansion. In other words, their empire, their manor, their castle that ruled the world. So whoever owns that empire, that building, see, you would say he is the heir to the John Jacob Astor estate. That's how you would do it. But you couldn't openly put your heir on the throne because then he would end up being murdered. This is what's always going on. So somehow or another, right around the same time that this was all going on, we have World War II. Remember, we started getting taxed in 1913. So this was their plan. They had to start taxing America to take control of us. They had to get rid of the people that were against it, the idea. So all these individuals are on this ship and they go down with the ship. Now, John Jacob Astor's heirs are scattered. He's got this one girl's, conveniently, she's 18 years old, so he's got another wife. He's got a couple other wives that they have heirs. One of them called Vincent, and he gets part of the inheritance, and several kids it's all split up between some of the girls and some of the boys, and it's all split up, and nobody's got any real authority or power. They're biding their time. We don't know where this inheritance is going to, how it's going to get down to a place where it could be used. So it has to kind of go underground for a while. Well, during this time after the war, or just before the war, we start taxing everybody so that we can go to war. Otherwise, we wouldn't even have the money. So the Americans are taxed up the yin-yang so we can go to this world war to finance these individuals in Germany that were building all these weapons to control us, to control the world. It's a fight to see who can get control of this technology. And over here in America, after the war, it's being played out with Edison and Tesla. Tesla had all this invention where he could give America free energy, but the Rothschilds don't want to do that. They want to have control of it. And Tesla holds out all his life, refusing. Now, they could have killed him, but they couldn't because they knew he knew stuff. He had this information, and they couldn't kill him. They wanted to get the information, and he wouldn't give it to him. He wrote it in secret code and so forth. That's why they sent in John Trump. Because whenever anybody good would get into power, they would try to wrest control of this very important information. So they put it in the hands of John Trump. He invented all this information that would give us this free energy, that would wrest the power and control from the bad guys. But once again, the bad guys killed Kennedy. And then they took that information, and there is this group of European nations, including Israel. Israel is actually the only nation involved in CERN that's not part of Europe. You can probably imagine why. And their goal, they claim, is to experiment and to figure out better technology for what? To get to the moon, or to get to the stars, or to figure out what matter is, or no, they're trying to invent ways to control us so that they can have their power and it never be taken away from them again. So the good guys, they have to bide their time until they can get control of the CIA and NASA, because remember, NASA was filled with all these individuals from Project Paperclip after the war, because the bad guys won World War II. Remember, these were satanic individuals like Aleister Crowley that sat in these rooms taking heroin and cutting themselves and sacrificing children and doing all this pedophilia and praying to Satan that he would enter into them. This is exactly what they did. Aleister Crowley went to Germany and did a satanic ritual on Hitler, that the beast, Satan, would enter into him and he'd be the beast that was prophesied in Revelation. And that they would be able to conquer the world through this darkness. They knew exactly what they were doing. And they were very dedicated, and they got control of Hollywood through Aleister Crowley and his temple at Ordi, and Parsons, who began controlling NASA, and individuals like L. Ron Hubbard, and on that we've talked about in the past. So all of this information was being exploited, and it was sitting there in different locations, in certain papers and manuscripts, and only certain individuals knew what it meant. John Trump was one of them. John Trump was sent in to perfect this Vandy gas generator company, which would be very high voltage and would become this thing we call CERN today, that now is being controlled by these governments that are being controlled by the elite on the side of the bad people. And that's what the internet is. And they're trying to set it up. When they get 5G, they'll have complete and total control. So that's how close it is. That's how much time we have. Now, I don't know if that'll be, if that's the end of it, if they ever reach that. I mean, that is one of the short-term goals that they have, to get this 5G. That, of course, would mean that we'd have more people under the control of the internet. And, of course, that's one of their goals, is to have control. So 5G is very important in their conniving and in what they're... And of course, if that is... that control over the world is in the hands of a few, and then we can no longer... They could just change our government. We can't vote anybody in. They can manipulate us in every way that they can. Then they've got it. So this is like a last-ditch effort. John Jacob Astor's estate was taken over by Donald Trump in the 90s. Now, we do not know why he purchased that building. I don't know if it's just some kind of a sign. Then he's seen holding a dove, which is the technology of peace that he got from his brother, or his uncle, John Trump, who is very good friends with Tesla, that knew all about Tesla's work and understood it. One of the very few people that did. But we know that this is a real battle. Why else would they have brought John Jacobs Astor's down in that ship? The richest man in the world, aside from the Rothschilds. Why would J.P. Morgan, who was supposed to be on that ship, not be on that ship, who worked for the Rothschilds? It was a thing that was happening at that time that's very similar to a thing that's happening now. This impeachment that's going on right now is their last-ditch effort. Because if Trump is impeached, then that means they win. Their lawyers, their mafia-empowered individuals like Hillary, or if they can get their socialist puppets in that will just say yes sir, yes ma'am, or whatever, and the Google will continue to get their 5G, and we'll all just get sucked into this system. And then it'll be over. So there's a whole lot more we could talk about, but I'm kind of being distracted here by people walking around the vehicle, and my dog's growling, stuff like that, and my mind's kind of being a little bit distracted. And I see we're almost, to an hour anyway. So I'll probably go ahead and close this. But we're going to talk more about this because there's so much here. Because of my being distracted, I've not been able to bring up some of the issues that we could bring up to help clarify all of this and what's really going on. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it there today, and we'll get back into it tomorrow, guys. We'll have a good day. This is David Vos. We'll see you again tomorrow.